The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie Gaprockman Taylor. In this episode, I talked with both Josh Hurley and Norm Johanson about the AWS microservice extractor for .NET and a whole heap of other .NET things that AWS are doing with .NET. Things like the .NET deployment tool, which is currently in preview. This allows you to deploy a .NET application to AWS in as few as 2 mouse clicks, even if you don't know the names of the AWS services yet. We also talked about the fact that AWS was the first cloud services provider to offer .NET hosting, and the fact that the AWS SDK for .NET was one of the first public NuGet packages, and exactly how Norm went about getting a NuGet account, which is not how you would do it these days. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So the first thing I'd like to say, gentlemen, is thank you ever so much for being on the show. I really appreciate the time that you've taken to chat with me today, because we're across loads of different time zones. And so it's middle of the afternoon for me, potentially early morning for yourselves. So thank you ever so much for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having us. I really look forward to talking to you today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Excellent. So for the people who are tuning in, we've got Josh Hurley and Norm Johanson from Amazon, ostensibly, from the AWS team, I believe. And they're going to talk to us about some .NET stuff that you can do on AWS. Part of it is for the microservices extractor, but there's loads of stuff happening. So let's just sort of connect and talk about all these different things, right?
Sounds great.
Yeah. Excellent. So I was wondering, before we start with all of that, would you mind perhaps introducing yourselves to the listeners, maybe a bit of an elevator pitch about you both, just so we know, who we're talking to, that kind of thing?
Sure. I'm Josh Hurley. I'm a .NET developer advocate here at Amazon Web Services. I started out my career way back in the 90s as the web was growing. I basically got more and more excited about that. In fact, actually dropped out of, I had applied to and accepted to law school and decided, hey, this thing called the web sounds much more interesting. And I went and continued to pursue it. And then when .NET came out, I was at a startup and got really excited. It was in beta, I think just like everyone else. And, at recording right now, we're just celebrating the 20th anniversary of it. And I got had stories about, from version 1 on, and it's been a great ride for that. I've not only did I have to sell my services, but I sometimes had to sell .NET, especially with the startups I worked with. They're like, because whatever the current flavor was, it was always more popular than .NET. But consistently, I was able to build solid applications, and also worked with a lot of enterprises too, Fortune 50 kind of companies. Eventually, Amazon called and said, what they were doing with .NET, and I said, this sounds exciting, and came aboard here. And my days are filled with helping customers with that are looking to migrate, modernize, or even just build net new applications here on AWS with .NET.
Cool.
And then for myself, I think Josh and I have similar lengths of career here. We've been doing this for quite a while. Been doing .NET for a long time. Used to build a lot of web apps and things like that. But somehow I always focused on developer tools. It somehow always sort of came back to that one. I think I just liked the audience of building tools for developers. I was always that guy that would, we're building a website, but let's build some tools to make it easier. I was always that guy on the team that would do that, which I think those are very helpful guys to have around. I had an interesting start. My first exposure to .NET it was again, the 1.0 days. I was working for Rational Software, if you remember back then, the Rational Rows tool. We were going to make the next generation of UML modeling. So it was going to be 1.0 version of that one, which was going to integrate with the Eclipse 1.0 and Visual Studio .NET 1.0. So it was a trilogy of 1.0 products that were all going to mesh together. And it didn't necessarily work out the best, we'll say it that. But I could definitely say that the Visual Studio .NET side was very exciting. It was like .NET is a really cool looking thing. And so pretty soon after that, I jumped ship for a startup for .NET. And then, about 12 years ago, I jumped shipped over to AWS when AWS was much smaller than it is today, to start building out their .NET developer experience. So I've been working as a developer over there, building that up.
That's really cool. I feel like I'm definitely the junior in this instance because I've only been working in .NET for around 11 years. So I am definitely looking to you both as, the oracles of all of the information.
I just remember we remember where all the bodies were buried in .NET. That's what it means. That life before generics and things like that, no link and things. So we all remember that.
Oh my goodness. My first programming job, we were building some stuff. We were building a sort of low-level hardware testing tool so we were building the GUI for it in .NET, and it would communicate with a low-level driver over USB and things like that. But we were stuck in the 3.0 days, and they were like, yeah, just write loads of stuff to the database and read it back out. And I'm like, this would be really good if I could use Link, but I'm not allowed. We can't upgrade.
Yeah, the language has definitely come a long ways. It's come a lot easier. I remember we fought some painful issues in the 1.0. I mean, overall 1.0 for .NET was still great. Coming from the C and C++ world back then, it's like, whoa, my life is so much nicer. Mm-hmm. But yeah, thinking about where we come from those 1.0 days and where Visual Studios come from those days, I feel like we're doing the .NET pitch right now. But yeah, it's been a good ride for us, I think, as .NET developers. We've had cool stuff. So.
Yeah, it is exciting. Yeah, as you mentioned, changes C#, obviously. That was the only thing I was late to the bandwagon. A lot of the apps, because I was writing classic ASP apps before .NET, so I was doing VB script. The companies, startups I was at, when I was convincing them to transfer, I didn't try to also say, oh, we should also switch the language to a brand new language. So VB.NET was it. So I was a little bit late on that. I think it was by 2005, 2006, I finally okay, we really need to standardize, because I had a couple projects where, okay, we'll write the back end in C# and the front end we'll keep VB, so everyone at VB.NET, so we'll keep everyone happy, which just became more insane than anything. So we finally, but yeah, right there with you. The improvements over time have just been fantastic with the language. If it was C#.
Absolutely. I just as a tangential thing, I think it would be a really fun thought experiment, but really cruel to someone, to take a sort of modern .NET developer and put them on a Windows XP machine with .NET 1, with Visual Studio as it existed then, and say, go ahead, go build your app. Let's see what happens.
What's funny is I'm
building some beautiful WinForms.
That's
exactly what I'm guessing.
Well, you joke about that. I've actually had, back in the day when I had my own business, I have customers that are still using WinForm applications I created in 2006 to run. And it's been mine. I think they're up to 4.7.1 or whatever. I don't think they're at 4.8. But basically, what language can you think of that, or platform can you think of that has had that longevity, where minor little tweaks they've been essentially using 95% of the same code for that long? Yeah, it's just amazing just to see that progression. Obviously, today they could take it, if you're going to rewrite it, you'd use something more modern and that looked a lot better too. This thing doesn't look great, but it functions and it achieves their goals. So yeah, it's great.
And that's exactly it, right? I often say to people, look, okay, the current code is working and it's doing whatever it needs to do. It's making you money somehow. It's solving some goal. If we were to rewrite it in some new paradigm, that code that would run the new version doesn't exist yet. And so it's going to waste you money until it's ready, right? the current running code is infinitely more valuable than the code which isn't running, right? And so the old credence of if it ain't broke, don't fix it just fits really well.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a conversation customers have all the time with us. I mean, it's, why do I need to port it? And in a lot of cases, you don't. I mean, Microsoft is extending support. It's tied to the OS, the .NET frameworks. Now, if it does what you said, meets their existing goals. Now, at some point, though, there's that where you're saying, okay, we want to be able to take advantage of, and it's usually UI specific. This thing is, just falling out. We're getting complaints from users about, if they don't know the exact workflow, it fails. This kind of thing is just clunky. That kind of thing. Then you're trying to leverage other third-party libraries and so forth, and you're like, wow, they're no longer supporting framework or not putting any effort into it. That time. Or you got the other customers we're talking to where they're moving a lot from on-prem onto the cloud. They're, one of their concerns is, frankly, what's it going to cost? And, you can go from virtual machine to our EC2 instances. Customers do that all the time, our lift and shift. But you're really not getting a lot of the benefit. It's when you start refactoring, replatforming, whether you're going to containers from virtual machines or you're actually refactoring to use Lambda, in our case, for serverless. That's when you start really leveraging all the value of the cloud has to offer. And once you start going down that path, you're like, especially on the serverless side, you want to be in, modern .NET. You don't want to try it. And with Lambda, you wouldn't be able to use .NET Framework with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess at that point, as long as you have engineered your code well enough, then you should be able to just swap a piece out, right? We talk about this all the time when we talk about like solid and things like that, right? The important principles that we all should really be engineering our code towards. You can then swap a piece out and it will just carry on working. You need to replace the front end, the WinForms with maybe UWP or some other technology. As long as you swap it out and the API contract stays the same, it should, in bunny quotes, just work. Or if you're moving from on-prem to in the cloud, all you're changing is the underlying bits, right? If you've done it right, then you should just be able to flip it over, deal with one or two tiny things, and then boom, your app is up and running. Or maybe you don't even need to deal with the one or two tiny things. It depends entirely, I suppose, on how you've built your application and all of your stuff, right?
Exactly. And actually, that's maybe a good segue into the AWS Microservice Extractor for .NET. Where we're talking about, I think you're alluding a little bit to a strangler pattern. It's, most companies don't want to try to take that huge monolithic kind of application and try to port it all at once, right? It's maybe you have that luxury. I've yet to be on a team where there's like, we're going to stop everything so that the dev team can go for 6 months or a year and go refactor this to this brilliant new. No, of course not. They're going to say, how do we, just as you mentioned, especially if you're an agile shop, which most companies are now, they're going to say, how can we, in a sane kind of fashion, peel off or take a vertical slice of our application, and then take that, and then we can refactor that, as you said, host that where we want to host it, and use the latest technology for that. And I think that the Extractor comes in, and I think that plays a valuable role. That's what I got excited about when I started learning about the tool, because it really allows you to, say, okay, we're going to break it up. Now, one interesting bit is that it focuses on framework, and that's one of the questions I get a lot is that, why isn't it, why can't I take a .NET Core or .NET 5 or 6 app and extract it that way? And to me, from at least with the conversations we've had with customers, many of them are still based on these, are dependent on these legacy .NET Framework applications. And if I put on my architect hat, even my Scrum Master hat, where I took a little detour earlier in my career, I try to think of the smallest units of work that's still meaningful that can be done, like in a sprint and so forth. And then I said, okay, well, it might actually make more sense that we take the existing framework app, extract pieces out of that to another framework app, and then only worry about refactoring that code to modern .NET at that point. And then you can host it. And if you've decoupled it correctly, you're calling APIs. So it doesn't matter if it's .NET 6 API base that you're calling from your old .NET framework, as long as you've coded it right and removed those dependencies. So I think that, to me, is I think a natural progression there.
I suppose that's one of the hardest parts, though, I guess, is identifying those vertical slices. And I mean, is that what the AWS Extractor for .NET does? Does it help me to identify those, or does it just do that for me?
It does. It basically we don't like the sort of that black box magic thing. So we want to give you control, but we also want to give you some guidance on, here's some suggestions. So and then ultimately try to port it or try to extract it for you once you've identified it. So essentially the process is you point to a existing framework application 4.x application. And it will import that in, analyze it, and then it will give you a visualization of all your dependencies within that. And there's a couple of different views that you get. The standard view shows you whether it's a incoming dependency or an external dependency. And then there's a couple other views that we also have. But ultimately, it's up to you because you know your application to say, okay, this is a logical grouping that makes sense. I'm going to move these together, box them, these nodes into a group, and then you can extract that group out. And it will actually take your code and extract that and create another, in the case of ASP.MVC, another ASP.MVC project with that same code in it. And then it'll give you an updated version of your what is left of your monolith and says, okay, this is now going to call that extracted code for you. We don't guarantee that it's going to compile, where hopefully, a lot of the times when I've tested it, and I have a whole bunch of apps that I've tested, it usually works, but there's sometimes you got to tweak a few things. You can't, automation isn't 100%. And again, it's a version 1 product, so there's always these corner cases we haven't seen and we definitely want to hear about them. But for the most part, you might have to tweak a few things and then get it out. But that's the general process that you use with the extractor.
I like that. And like you say, there may be some corner cases where maybe I, as a developer, am doing something that the extractor tool can't really figure out. Like maybe I'm doing something that's just a little bit too off-piste, and the extractor goes, I'm just going to leave you to figure that out. I like that because then I like that it's then down to me to then go ahead and test my thing to make sure that it'll, like you said, right? I know the code that I've written best. Your tool, as good as the tool may be, it won't know how I write code. It won't know the domain. It won't know any of the constraints, right? And so It's kind of like, I'm seeing it more as like a helping hand rather than you must do it like this. It's more like, let me show you. I think it works like this. Go have a look.
Yeah, and along those lines, there's a couple of little helping hand things. They're optional, but you can, depending on what you're trying to do, if you've got an app and and I think we've all been guilty of it, we keep adding more and more functionality. And we, as developers and as teams, we sometimes say, this is no longer going to be used. And but nobody wants to go through that extra effort of saying, all right, we'll deprecate that. Okay, when there's always Bob or Sue in the corner says, oh, they really love it, but nobody else in the company uses it, and we just got to teach them the new way of doing it. Those kind of features. But one of the interesting things is that within this tool is you can actually put a profiler onto running applications, and it'll actually see how often and what is calling what from a class to a class, and you can get that runtime metrics profile in with that visualization. So not only do you know, okay, these 3 classes call this service. This class in particular calls it a lot more frequently than the others. This is probably a more valuable use of our time because that is used so heavily opposed to these other ones. And if you actually see something that has almost no usage, it's like, that might be that case where we just got to bite the bullet and say, I don't think we need this around anymore. But you can, or it's a low priority on migrating there. The other interesting helpful hand kind of thing is the integration. If you've got Porting Assistant, which is our tool that basically analyzes your code before you go to try to port it to modern .NET, and it'll give you an analysis of what are compatible and not compatible for like NuGet libraries and things like that. And it'll actually create a shell or attempt to create a shell of what is compatible so you can actually get an idea of that. It's not rewriting any of your code for you, but it at least gives you that helping hand. But if you do have that Porting Assistant tool with the Microservices Extractor, it'll actually tell you, okay, these libraries are .NET compatible, modern .NET compatible, or not, and that will actually help aid you as well when you're deciding what you're going to extract.
I like, because then I could take that to whoever the decision maker is and say, look, this code base is huge. To do it will take this much time. These are the paths that we can see are the most sort of often hit. And then the decision maker can go, right, okay, A, B, C, do those because they are the money makers. They are the most important things. They are the things our customers need. D, E, and F, don't worry about it because that's internal stuff. Maybe there's some other tool, like you were saying, maybe someone in the office or some other tool is communicating with those steps. It's fine, leave those as they are because that's maybe not customer facing or something. But these 3 bits here, go and focus your time on those. And I like the idea, like you were saying there, of the it takes a look at the NuGet packages and things like that and says, okay, so maybe this path you might have to stay on framework because you're using some API that isn't in Core or 5 or 6 or anything like that. Maybe it's not a cross-platform thing either yet, or it may not be a cross-platform thing. And so then you're able to even more, I guess, granularly target things and say, right, okay, if we are going to extract this, we need to know about this pitfall. Because I've been in that situation myself where we've gone and extracted something and started working on it, and then some bright spark goes, we'll put it in Docker, and then nothing works because it requires like Windows authentication or something, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent. So we've talked a little bit about the microservices extractor. Norm, we haven't really included you in the conversation. I do apologize about that.
Excluded.
I was wondering, because there's lots going on at AWS for .NET right now, right? There's the microservices extractor. There's Lambda has always been a thing. I was wondering, would you mind? Are you guys able to talk about some of the exciting stuff that's happening in AWS for .NET developers? Because I feel like a lot of .NET devs go, yeah, Azure, that's a Microsoft thing. It's .NET is a Microsoft thing. I'll stay over there because I know this thing, right? But obviously there are other cloud providers. So let's talk a little bit about AWS for .NET, I think.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of people they don't think first on AWS, but for .NET. But in reality, I think we actually have more tooling for .NET than I think any other actual language. There's a lot of stuff we have for that. One of the projects I've been working on the last year that I think is pretty interesting is we've been kind of rethinking how you should come to deploying your application on .NET, right? I mean, if you haven't come to AWS before, right, you come to it and you see, holy cow, there's a ton of services, and I don't know who came up with their naming scheme, but I don't follow along, right? So it's challenging to figure out where do I go, right? So that's been sort of a change in our tooling we've been thinking about of like, don't think about how do I get my application deployed to X service, but like I just have my application. How do I get it deployed? Like where do I get it deployed to AWS? So we've been thinking of this new deployment tool we've been working on is like, let's start from the application. Let's look at your application and say, judging by what you've got here, this looks like you want to do containers, or maybe this is more of a monolithic application. Let's look at this and then let us present to you like, this is probably where you want to go. You should deploy to here, and then we'll help you deploy it there. So it's sort of like just thinking of like, how do I deploy to AWS? We'll see, this is a monolithic kind of looking application, which is still fine, all good. I'm not killing off the monoliths in the world. And we'll let you easily deploy that out to Beanstalk, right? And we'll say, this is a good one to go to Elastic Beanstalk, and we'll go run it, straight unmanaged EC2 instances. Or we see, you got Docker files. You clearly look like you want to containerize this one. We'll let you say, let's get you running on ECS Fargate, where you don't have to manage any services there, or you can try out a new app runner. So it sort of takes a lot of that initial thought process of like, where do I even land? Which I think is very hard for new people to come to AWS because it is so many things you can do. So that's a big part we're doing. And, the goal with this tooling, though, is to not just make it sort of this, like, it's a great demoware, right? Yeah, like, now I figured it out. Now I don't need to use this tool. But, like, how can we use this tool for once, like, you can start in Visual Studio. We have the toolkit for Visual Studio. You'll be able to just right-click and just say publish to AWS, and we'll figure out how to get there. And that's great for when you're prototyping, right? You're trying to figure out, but few of us, I know there are some, but few of us deploy to prod from Visual Studio.
Not a good practice.
Not a good practice, but I've been in those calls. But you can learn in there. You can get the interactive experience. But the experience, or the way we design the tool, is you can easily switch from Visual Studio to a command line experience, right? You can then also just, we sort of integrated with the .NET CLI, because you can just say, .NET, install AWS deploy tool CLI. It's one of those .NET tools. And everything you did in Visual Studio, you can easily do on the command line, and you can script that. That was actually kind of one of our fun things from, me geeking out on the tech part. It was, we actually make it so the Visual Studio and the CLI actually use the same thing, because there's basically a signal R connection between the CLI and Visual Studio to do all that. So that was sort of the fun coding of like, hey, we found a use for signal R besides making a chat application. So that was really fun to do for us. But yeah, it allowed us to easily do the automation part in there. But we also sort of recognize that so many people, we can come up with, this is what we think you want to do. But, every company, they have their architect. This is what you got to do. This is the rules that we do. It's great. Those people, they know their domain. They know what their company needs. And we want to make sure that those people can help out too. Like, they can define, this is the deployment architecture that you want for it. So that's where, we built the tooling under the underlying deployment code is called CDK. I don't know if your audience knows that, but that's what we call the Cloud Development Kit. It allows you to write infrastructure as code. And that's what we use under the covers to do the deployment for you. We basically, we look at your project and we say, okay, for this, let's generate some CDK code and let's go execute that. And it creates all your infrastructure as sort of one single unit that you can then tear down and all those things. But we also wanted to make it so the architects of your companies can say, this is really how we want us to deploy. So you can create what we call a deployment project that hooks up into our deployment tooling that has their own CDK project, which can be based off of our initial one. So you don't start from scratch. You can start from ours, customize it to add your own rules. Maybe you have your own certain VPC settings or sidecars you have to add to your containers. All those things that everyone has their special requirements. They can do that. They can check that into their repos, and then as their developers check out their code, you can share it. Jamie, you can then check out the repo, and you'll go Visual Studio, and now you'll see here's Josh's preferred architecture for when you deploy it. This is what you need to do. So, you as a company can actually change the UI experience inside Visual Studio or the CLI to define this is what our company's best practice is, but get that same sort of experience for it. And it's a unified experience. We don't support Lambda yet with it, which I know is coming. So right now we're sort of focusing on all the non-Lambda cases. But for all those non-Lambda cases, it's sort of that unified experience where I can just right-click and see, hey, this is a batch application, or this is a web application. It's a Blazor WebAssembly application. We'll look at all those and say, this is what you should do. So it's still in preview stages right now. We're getting pretty far on that one. I think that the CLI's come a long ways. The Visual Studio integration is getting pretty close there. I think we've got sort of two different experiences right now in Visual Studio. The legacy wizards that we've had for a long time in the toolkit. But then we're putting in this new one that's sort of giving that unified experience. So that one I'm pretty excited about for what that's going to mean for us as we go. You look at where we're going to be in 6 months and a year on that project, and I think we're going to have a lot of powerful flexibility for our customers there.
And just to add on to what he was saying or clarify, for the toolkit there, if you want to actually see all this in action, AWS Toolkit for Visual Studio, and we do support Visual Studio 2022 rather, as well as 17 and 19. But there's a preview, as Norm was alluding to, there's a preview option, and I'm really blown away about how nice the tool is. It's still in preview, but how nice it is, and the recommendations make sense. And what Norm's saying, I like being able to know that it's not a black box, that I can actually look under the covers to see what it's built, and then be able to reuse that in a different in the way that I want to in a CI/CD or script. Use a command line version to script it. Yeah, I mean it's a definitely I think is for our customers something that's compelling. And as Norm's saying, we do have so many different options. When I go out and talk to customers, it's like, from compute, we got the if you're just from the on-prem world, you're like, okay, virtual machines, and then probably containers, right? Companies are more and more adopting that. But there's everything else in between for all these different types of ways to get out. I mean, we have so many various types of containers because, customers are asking for Kubernetes, so we have Kubernetes support. Then they're asking for more abstraction away from saying, I really don't want to have a whole team of DevOps people to manage the containers. So we have Fargate, which manages a lot of that. And then what the tool that Norm's talking about, the .NET deployment tool, uses App Runner. And then the App Runner actually even takes that for web applications and abstracts a lot more from a scaling and deployment standpoint. So I think there's that, that whole breadth and depth, and just getting a footing. I think this tool eliminates a lot. It gives you a better on-ramp onto AWS for, as you said, for a .NET developer that might just be solely focused on the other cloud provider out there that's known with .NET. This is a good way to get into it.
Sure, and what I like about that is it's like a common theme that I keep coming back to in 2022. Is it's lowering that barrier to entry. Right? If I can run a CLI tool that will do its best to sort of figure out, maybe you want to host it here, maybe you want to host it here, maybe you need this component, maybe you need to split it up and host this part here and this part here, that makes it easier for me to go from, especially if I'm a solo developer, right? Imagine the situation, right? I'm learning .NET and I want to host it on AWS. Well, first off, I got to go learn .NET. Before I can learn .NET, I got to learn C#. Once I've learned those two, I then need to learn what AWS is, and I need to figure out, like you were saying earlier on, Nom, about which thing do I host it on, right? Do I go with an EC2? Do I go with this? Do I go with that? Do I go with this? Do I just bite the bullet and do a virtual machine and just hope that I can afford it, And I'm not saying the virtual machines are expensive, but virtual machines, regardless of where you are hosting, can get very expensive very quickly, right? Compared to other options that are available. And I like that idea of reducing that barrier to entry. And I feel like one of the things so how do I put this as plainly and unpolitical as possible, right? Microsoft makes .NET. Microsoft are the people who make Azure. So it would make sense that their tutorials are like, hey, and when you're done, host it on Azure and we'll make it super easy. And so because AWS don't, the folks at Amazon who work on AWS will be contributing to .NET. They're not writing the core documentation for .NET. So it won't be, hey, also you can go to MSDN and look for AWS and it'll be there, because it may not be. And so, you folks are having to fight I suppose fight is the wrong word, but you folks are in a different paradigm. You're like, hey, okay, so let me get Norm, who's great at building tools, and get Norm to build this tool that will make it super easy for you to just go, here's my project, go host it, I don't care. Oh, not that I don't care, but like right now at this moment in time, when my job is get it hosted and I don't know how to host it, do that bit for me.
Yeah, we've had that. Customers, once they realize what they can do, they are happy. But you're absolutely right. It's conveniently enough in Visual Studio, you can publish to Azure very easily, right? With us, once you download our extension, you can do the same, and especially really well with the new .NET deployment tool that Norm and his teams work on. But it is that barrier of just one, it's awareness that hey, we've got a great set of tools, and Norm didn't mention, but Norm, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the .NET SDK goes back to 2008, so it preceded all the other cloud providers even opening. So that's how long AWS has been doing .NET and supporting .NET. So it's like we know it. Our team's excited. There's very passionate people. You should see our internal Slack channels talking about .NET, and we sometimes have little quizzes that characters you can do something in, and all kinds of things. And it's like people just pile. I mean, I'm sure it's like at other shops too, but it's there internally we do have a lot of passion around .NET from our teams, including Norm's team.
Yeah, interesting. The interesting trivia point there is the age of the .NET SDK. Also, it is the first actual AWS SDK. So people don't really the first SDK that actually AWS came up with. Like, I think we qualified as the first unified SDK because if you remember the early aughts, right, there was it was a different world back then, right? And then eventually we decided at AWS it's like we should just have here's like a whole this is the SDK for this language, and .NET was the first one to do that. So it's people get surprised when they find out that .NET was our first SDK, which has changed a lot. Like that's been one of my I was originally hired. That was my job to work on the SDK, which is still that's my day job, is to make sure that keeps going. And I started. AWS was about 15 or so services back then.
Wow.
So quite a bit different than we are today. Yeah, and I came in and I think the SDK was launched in November, I think 2008, and I think I started 4 months later, and then they said, "You get this, take care of it." So, but yeah, we used to release new versions of the SDK like maybe once a month or so when SDK, there's some service came in, but the explosion is just kind of hard for me to fathom even now of like, now I just double checked before we talked today. And so the SDK now supports 299 services. So probably by the time this airs, we'll cross the 300 cross. So, and that's just kind of crazy to me of like, we used to be this one little DLL. It was all fine. And then, eventually I think we're on the V3 of our SDK right now, version 3. And so like V2 was still like a single DLL, but it got to this point where it's like, well, this is an 8 meg DLL. Everyone's dragging in just to access one service. It's like, and that was like 6 years ago. Imagine what it would have been like now. So, it was like the V3 was like, hey, let's break this up into separate services so it could be more manageable of that just dealing. And then, definitely is an interesting challenge for my group to keep up because, we as the org, so, my org, I work with all the other SDKs too, right? So they're all the other languages. So you can imagine a bunch of devs all passionate about their own language, how heated conversations we have, whose language is best. But yeah, we have to make sure that we are not the bottlenecks for AWS innovations, right? So AWS is innovating as, we all see how fast they're throwing things out, and no one's going to say, well, we'd innovate, but the SDK hasn't gotten up yet, right? So we have to keep up with that. And if you have 300 services, and every service has a couple launches a day or a year, that basically means every single day something is coming out. So, like I said, like we used to release once a month or so. Now it's we get the weekends off, but basically other than that, every day we were releasing new versions of the SDK just to keep up with things.
Aren't you at something, if I might be mistaken, over 500 NuGet packages out there now instead of having that single?
The SDK is 300, and then we have lots of other things, and then the CDK itself is separate packages, and we give NuGet a pounding on as we push out stuff all the time. So we stress that system out.
So then. Sorry, Josh. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to add. I think that alludes to the fact that when you're developing for .NET on AWS, it's the common things. It's not an AWS specific quirky thing. There's some vendors out there that you have to get into their mindset of saying, okay, well, this is how they do it, which is odd from normal development. What I like about the SDK team, and I've been here about 3 years, so I think I was at service 86 was the count when I started, and, so a little newer than Norm. But I was always impressed by they're following the standards that we're used to as developers, and NuGet being one of them. And I like the parsing out and only need keep your deployment package as small as possible, and that's one of the strategies. Only get what you need, call what you need rather, reference what you need through that.
Hello, everyone. I am very sorry to interrupt this episode of the show, but I wanted to ask a favor of you all. As you will have known by looking at the podcatcher you're listening to this on, episode 100 of the show is coming up really quickly. And I'm having an AMA, or an Ask Me Anything, to celebrate. To collect questions, I've set up an AMA page on the website over at dotnetcore.show/2022-AMA. That's dotnetcore.show/2022-AMA. dotnetcore.show/2022-AMA. If you have any questions on .NET and any of the related technologies, podcasting, or literally anything else, head on over to dotnetcore.show/2022-AMA. I'd love to add your question to the episode, but the only way to make sure that it gets added is for you to submit it in time. We do have a cutoff point, and that is June 1st, 2022. So get your questions in quickly, and I'll make sure to put a link into the podcatcher you're listening to this on, so you don't have to make any notes or anything. Just press through on the podcatcher and type up your question. Anyway, back to the episode. So just to set a little bit of, because you mentioned there about .NET on AWS, the SDK goes all the way back to 2008, right? So that predates .NET 5, obviously. It predates .NET Core, obviously. It goes all the way back to, one of the...
It targeted .NET Framework 2.0 when I started. That's...
Wow.
Yeah. I quickly got us off that one. That was a little too painful for me.
Oh my goodness! You see that another little sidebar. I wonder whether if you could pull that version of the code, could you run that today?
Oh yeah, you can. I mean, it's out on NuGet. I mean, that's the great thing about NuGet. And I've been on customer calls. So yeah, I downloaded the 1.0 version of the SDK. I don't think the 1.0 version is not, because the 1.0 that predates NuGet. We were like one of the first people that actually got onto NuGet. Like, I remember getting a GitHub issue that said, "Hey, there's this NuGet thing. You guys should try it out." And like, I had to email the NuGet team to get access to publish there. But yeah, those packages are still there. And one of the things I've always strived with the SDK, because in my view, .NET developers, I mean, we all love new hotness. I mean, no one's going to deny that. But we also don't like to just change for the sake of change and break my code, right? We love the fact that, like we talked before, like all those applications that we wrote, 15 years ago, there's a good chance they still work, right? So for the most part, even like we're on V3 of the SDK, the coding pattern hasn't changed a lot. Because I've always wanted to make it easy to upgrade between versions. We fix a lot of the things under the covers, but we like to keep that. And so, yeah, I've had customer calls who said, "Yeah, I downloaded the 1.0 version from NuGet, and it works." There's some feature missing because obviously it's 10 years old, and I'm like, you really need to upgrade. I mean, to be clear, 1.0 and 2.0 are not supported, but they are available. So I would not recommend anyone do it. But yeah, the codeways and all that still works. And that's not just the SDK, that's also AWS there's a high bar of keeping things up and running. Like even, we might, to remove APIs or change APIs, one of my other many jobs is running the API bar racer program inside AWS for the services, and I calling out, it's like, no, you can't make this breaking change. We don't do this at AWS. So this is why we keep it so applications keep working.
I like that, because you were saying earlier on about one of the first sort of cloud services to offer .NET hosting, and you have the AWS .NET library and the SDK and things like that. So if I'm listening in and I'm working for a really large enterprise and we're still in .NET 3.5, 4.1, whatever, I don't have to then immediately go, "Everyone, we have to upgrade or rewrite to modern .NET so we can host on AWS," right? I should be able to take my application, maybe do some jiggery-pokery to make sure I'm not doing anything that requires file system access of my machine, and find a way to host it on AWS, right? You're not saying that I have to be on the latest and greatest to host on AWS.
Yeah, we've always tried to keep a very large support matrix, because, yeah, obviously we're supporting .NET 6, the latest. We're very excited and anxious for .NET 7 as well. I think the preview is going to come out for that soon. But yeah, we still support way.NET Framework. We go all the way back right now to .NET Framework 3.5. So you can still do those in the SDK. So, we try really hard to make sure we don't leave customers behind on that. Because yeah, .NET's been around a long time, and no one wants to rewrite that application that's making them money. All right.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like I said earlier on, working code is infinitely more has infinitely more worth than any code I've got in my head, right?
Yep.
And you never know. Like the person who wrote the original application may have moved on to greater things and taken that knowledge with them, right? And so part of that knowledge will not be around. And so rewriting an application may actually be a lot more difficult than you initially thought. And so being able to just lift and shift as is probably the better option. But until you can have that deep discussion of, do we really, so just to sidetrack a little bit, I remember one of the places that I used to work, when .NET Core 2 came out, they were like, right, from now on, everything is in .NET Core 2. And at that point, I'd already been writing about .NET Core for a year and a half, and I was starting to think about doing the podcast. And I'd said, okay, so I've got a question. Why? And, not in an interrogative way, just like, why are we moving to .NET Core? Is it easy? Because if it is just like to put on the website and say we use the latest and greatest, that's fine. But also, there are some pitfalls, migrating things it's not a trivial task. Sorry. So whenever someone says to me, we're migrating to the latest version, I immediately, right, pump your brakes. Let's talk about this for a second, right?
Yeah. No, I remember when Core, I was excited, like everyone else, in 2016 when it wasn't going to be .NET 5. They were like, nope, we're redoing it all, and we don't have to deal with all this legacy stuff. We're gonna have something really performant and so forth. Got excited. But I remember going through the decision process, and it sounds like you had to do it as well, where, in my case, I had my own business. I was trying to sell these applications to customers. And it's like, well, there's this sexy new, version of .NET that's coming out, completely rebuilt. And 1.0, it just, as exciting as it was, pretty limited in feature set compared to Framework. And it really wasn't until 2.1 that I was actually building production apps that when we went through the decision process up front, that we said, yes, it actually makes more sense for us to now target 2.1 opposed to using Framework. And it's just that, businesses aren't just, they don't get as excited as the rest of us that are geeking out on the tech. It's like, oh, don't you know, it's 10 times faster, but no, it's, it's like, no, the average person in a business case, a decision maker is going to have to evaluate a whole set of things. But yeah, it was 2.1 at least for me, when I was like, that was the magic point where I was like, okay, I think this really has legs and has the feature set, and I can sell it.
I think even for AWS, that's true too. I mean, we definitely jumped. As soon as the .NET Core came announced, I was super excited because I will admit I was having career doubts of like, should I be focusing on .NET? Because I don't know if .NET's got a future in the world of cloud and stuck on Windows, right? And then when .NET Core was announced, I was super excited, and we were pushing hard. And I remember when .NET Core 1 came out, and we pushed to have Lambda support, right? So that was our serverless support, supporting .NET Core 1.0, which was really exciting for us because, when Lambda first came out, and we were like, oh, we're going to get left behind because it's Windows and that's never going to really be a great thing there. And then we knew, well, we have a future now as .NET developers. But I will say that the 1.0 experience was pretty rough. The Project JSON and all those fun things back then. I think in a lot of ways our the .NET Core 1.0 Lambda, it worked for quite a few people, but it was also like, I'll come back to me when you get to the next version, right? And I think it was the 2.1 version of Lambda that really made it so, now I see that this is actually like the tooling is now firmed up, the platform is solid, And I think that's when we started hitting our stride there with Lambda and .NET Core. It was the 2.1 launch. So.
Yeah, and I feel like that's like par for the course with almost any new technology, right? Regardless of whether you're the technology vendor or like a hoster or a tool builder, version 1 is always painful. There's a reason why, people say, oh yeah, don't worry, always wait for version 2, because all of the people that are the early adopters, there's, I'm worried about the word evangelist, but like the early adopters, the advocates of the early version were like, oh my goodness, this is awesome. I can't do anything with it, but it's amazing, right? Those folks then have all of the problems that need to be solved to get to version 2, right? Because whoever it is that's making it, if it's Microsoft, if it's Amazon, if it's, the mom and pop shop down the street, whoever is making version 1, it's all about that domain knowledge, right? I can see, it's almost like I've got the blinkers that a horse will have when they're in a horse race. I can see the path in front of me and I can see where I'm going. But what I don't understand, because I don't understand the users of this thing, because I'm not dog fooding it yet, I can't see the corner cases, the edge cases where, when .NET Core 1.0 first came out, immediately the question on a lot of people's tongues was, but where's the GUI? Where's the GUI? And what a lot of people didn't realize at the time is that cross-platform UI is so difficult, to the point where it's taken until 2022 for Microsoft to be able to say, hey, we've got a cross-platform UI application framework-ish, and if you want to do it, it'll work everywhere except Linux, and you can carry on, but then that, I said that jokingly, but like Linux as a desktop is hard to program for, because I'm using, to talk to you chaps now, I'm using a Linux desktop, and it has it uses Cosmic, which is a desktop environment created by System 76. But it's based on Ubuntu, and Ubuntu uses GNOME, and Ubuntu is based on Debian, and that uses, you can have GNOME, you can use XFCE, there's a whole bunch of acronyms that maybe don't mean a lot to the majority of Windows developers. But the point I'm getting at is that on Windows, or indeed on Mac, you've got Explorer or Finder. There's one way to draw a window. You want a window? We will draw it this way, and it will look like this, because this is the operating system paradigm. But on many of the Linuxes, there are upwards of tens of different desktop environments, all with their own sort of paradigms and designs and design language. And so that chunk is so hard to do. And so for a lot of people who jumped on the 1.0 bandwagon, they were like, well, but I want to build desktop apps. Well, that's not happening, right? Because we've only just come up with this thing, right? In fact, I believe in the early days, it was still using like some node technologies in the background just to do because I believe Kestrel uses, was it lib?
Oh, libuv.
libuv. Yeah. So it wasn't even using all Microsoft technology, but that's fine because open source is a thing and that's what you do. And it was only in the 2.0 space when they actually said, you don't have to put anything in front of your app now because Kestrel is more battle tested. Whereas in V1, it was like, okay, you can use it, but put it behind Nginx, put it behind IAS, put it behind something, because we can't guarantee that it will stay stable because it's an early version, because it's version 1, right? Right. And I feel like that happens with everything, right? Version 1 of a new line of cars, version 1 of microphones, version 1 of video games consoles. One of my hobbies is video games, right? And I love to do that. I love to play video games with the kids, love to play video games with my brother. But we all know, everyone across the world knows, never buy a video game console at launch because it will have a terrible launch, right? And that's not to do with who makes the console. That's just because there's so much stuff going on. V1 of the software isn't going to be great. And V1 of anything is not great. That's the point I'm trying to get at, right? And so if you guys were trying to host V1, all I can say is thank you ever so much for putting that effort in, because I can't even imagine, because V1.0 to 1.1, in that minor change, they ditched Project JSON, which I would say is a pretty big change.
Oh yeah, it caused a lot of headache for the tooling experience. Because everything was geared towards 1.1 now, And it's like, no, we have to make you somehow do lots of weird settings to force it to go into 1.0 to work in Lambda. So I was super excited to get us off of the 1.0 platform.
So what other things are going on there? Because like I said earlier on, I know the other cloud provider, right? I don't know so much AWS. In fact, what I have done on AWS is I do some of the transcriptions for the podcast with AWS, but that's not a .NET thing, right? That's just like, here's some audio, give me some JSON, and I'll work from that. And that's pretty cool. But what other things are cooking in .NET land and AWS?
Well, I think the big thing everyone is very antsy with, again, if we go back to Lambda, everyone is very curious about .NET 6 and Lambda support, which we're working very hard on. Again, hopefully by the time this goes live, that will be out there. We'll see. I'm not sure exactly when we're airing, so that's why I'm going to be cautious on whatever we're saying there. And I'm pretty excited about this one because this will be our 5th Lambda.NET runtime. We did 1.0, 2.0, 2.1, 3, 3.1, and now this will be 5. So this will be our 6. Yeah. For the most part, all the other ones were sort of just like, let's take in the latest Microsoft bits. That's for the most part what it was. We'll update the tooling and take MX bits. And I feel like with .NET 6, and we've been doing most of all the work out there on GitHub, so that's all, most all this is in the open source. And we're trying to change things up a bit, and they're making new features for us. .NET 6 has added a lot of things for us, right? So we've got, C# added top-level statements and minimal APIs for ASP.NET Core. So we wanted to make sure that you could actually write your Lambda functions taking advantage of those, which is very different than what you used to be. And that's something that, I don't know if all your listeners know, that you can actually take your ASP.NET Core applications and host those as a Lambda function in there. So, and traditionally it was using the whole program in startup, and we'd swap out Kestrel with our own implementation. But now, we did some interesting work, I think, to make it so it works for, when I'm just using that minimal API. So you can write the ASP.NET Core in a single file and have a bunch of routes mapped out there, and it can all be deployed to Lambda. And you get all the benefits of scaling and pricing for that point of view. And another thing I'm really excited about that we've got going on is we're actually coming up with a new Lambda framework to write your applications with. So the normal programming model with Lambda is essentially you get an event. It's a JSON object that you serialize into a POCO, right? That's the basic programming model. Then you go do the rest, right? And then in our ASP.NET Core world, we basically take that event and we turn it into an ASP.NET Core request and send it through the ASP.NET Core request. Like that's how that works at a super high level. So we kind of have these two different ways. You can look at it super low level of here's your event, you go do everything for you, or you have an ASP.NET Core. So they've got a high framework there, but we wanted something sort of in the middle for people that maybe want something more lightweight, but maybe not as low level as I got to do all the plumbing there. So our new framework, it's a NuGet package we have out there. It's in preview, because it's going to be targeting .NET 6. It's called Amazon Lambda Annotations. Basically, it's going to use source generators. That's the new feature that we had come out. It came out in 5, but I think it really came into fruition in .NET 6, where basically we can now write your code in a much more like idiomatic, almost like an ASP.NET controller, right? Like this comes from the headers, and this comes from the routes, and all much more idiomatic way. And then with the source generator added to that, we will basically at compile time generate that translation layer of going from that single object event that we came in from Lambda and convert it into my much more idiomatic experience. And then this is going to then also make it an easy way to integrate like the whole dependency injection. I can have my own, we're bringing startup class back, where you can have a startup class that defines your dependency injection that will allow you to then say, these are all of the services I want in there, which has been like sort of a challenge in the current Lambda program model. People have been like kind of homebrewing their own mechanism, but now we're just going to make it sort of seamless with the source generator. But of course, it still will have the same sort of programming model under the covers. And the nice thing about this, with what I'm excited about, because it makes my life easier, and that's always what I like, is anytime you come with a new framework, now it's like, how many tools do we have to update to support this, right? Everyone's got to know about this new framework and do it. But with a source generator, right, you are just integrating with the compiler. So anything that worked with just .NET assemblies just automatically works. So yeah, we have a lot of .NET deployment tooling already out there with Visual Studio and CLI. There's also the SAM CLI tooling out there, and customers that make their own sort of deployment tooling. But all of those ultimately have to use the .NET compiler, right? So the .NET compiler is going to kick in the source generator, and they get all this functionality that we're going to add as well. So that's going to be pretty nice. So I feel like with our .NET 6 launch, we're going to really sort of change the way. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you'll be able to easily migrate because the underlying program model hasn't changed. Migration should be just changing target frameworks and things like that. But we're going to give you a lot more interesting ways to write your Lambda function, I think, when we get that out there. So I'm very excited for when that comes out.
See, I really like that about, that's one of the great things I really like about open source, is that a seemingly tiny change over here in something that may not be you may not think is as consequential, everyone gets the benefit of it, right? I remember, I think it was last year, I was talking to one of the developers of Ryujinx, which is a Nintendo Switch emulator written in .NET. Now, we didn't talk about the gray area of, we're not talking about piracy. We're talking about, emulating an entire system on your computer using .NET, which when .NET first came out, it was like, this will never be used for performant code. I remember at university, right. I was 0408. And at university, he was saying you will never do anything that requires performance in .NET. You will do it in something else and call it from .NET, right? And then I'm talking to this chap from the Ryujinx team, and he's like, yeah, so what we did was we submitted a bunch of pull requests to the .NET runtime, which made our code faster. But then that has the benefit of making everyone else's code faster. And, the things that you're talking about there, Norm, about, well, if we just hook into the source generators in the compiler, well, that makes our job so much easier, and as a consumer of hosting platforms, if I can hook into the APIs that are provided by yourselves, by any of the others, makes my job easier, right? And so this inconsequential tiny thing that happens over here in like the framework, right? Or I'm worried about saying framework because people might think framework with a capital F, right? But in like the CLI, right? This tiny change here that looks like a tiny change from where I'm sitting, but is huge for the people who are writing it, then bubbles up through everyone else until it gets to me. And it's a huge change, right? Because one of the things that I was going to ask you earlier on, Norm, is that if I want to do a modern .NET, so .NET Core, .NET 5, .NET 6 Lambda, right? I can't just give you an ASP.NET project, right? Because there's way too much going on there. That's way too heavy. And you sort of answered my question by saying, yeah, well, we can give you these attributes and we can make it easier for you. Because I know that with the Microsoft hosting platform, to do their version of Lambda, you have to write your application in a very specific way. They actually give you a template to follow and you have to do these, they jump through these hoops to make it work in that way. And my thought was, well, maybe we have to do the same for AWS Lambda, but you said yourself there's this new set of attributes that are in beta at the moment that you could just write maybe one or two files, throw these attributes in, and guess what? You got yourself a Lambda, and it's running on ASP.NET Core, right? And that makes it easier for me because I understand that paradigm. I understand ASP.NET Core. At the moment, I don't understand Lambda for .NET, but I will after I've used these attributes, right? I'll get a better understanding. I can just push a button. I can run the CLI tool we talked about earlier on, and it's going to go, yep, you want to host it over here. I could do that for you now, or I can give you the tools to, the code or whatever, the YAMLs or whatever you need to be able to do that in your tool chain. And guess what? I've gone from no code to some code to it's on a server somewhere. or rather, it's not on a server somewhere. It's running.
It's serverless, man. We got serverless. You got
Exactly, right?
Wait a minute! Don't give that away, Norm. Don't tell them there's servers involved.
just floating around in the cloud, ready to run.
That's exactly it. It's ephemeral. That's what it is. But that's what I like, right? Like I said earlier on, my thing this year is talking about the reduction of barrier to entry, and it also makes me more productive. If I can just type a single line command line into my terminal and it goes, yep, do it. In fact, hit enter now and we'll do it for you, perhaps. I'm not saying that your tools do this, but hit enter now and we'll do it for you. Right click publish.
That was one of the goals. Like, we would, if you want to, can you just push enter a couple times and get deployed, right? Like, let's, don't I think that was... So when I made the original wizards inside the Visual Studio Toolkit, right, and I was like, well, there's all these amazing options in AWS. Let's make sure we expose every one of them to the user, right? Because they're cool, and they are cool, right? But when you're new and you're just like, I don't know I don't know the AWS vocabulary yet, right? So it's challenging, right? So that was sort of one of our design goals with our new tooling is like, yeah, I can just actually right-click, say, yep, go push the publish button, and I can deploy in 2 clicks, right? To make it so that it's not, trying to speak the language that people know. But of course, once you know things, right, you want to do all those tweaks. So that's the balance we always play. And we always want to make sure that you have all the breadth of AWS's power at your fingertips, but it doesn't need to be right in your face when you're just trying to figure out where to get started at. I think that's the biggest design change, I think, from the old ways we used to make the wizards inside Visual Studio to this new experience of like, let's focus on first getting in your face what you need to know, and then you can get into deeper when you know more about what you want to do.
Exactly. Always make sure there's an advanced button, but yeah, the default experience, because I think there's that gratification of, you're brand new. You want that hello world experience, and in the cloud, that means I want to see my hello world up in my browser, hosted in that magic serverless space there. If it's Lambda, but ultimately, Norm's right. I mean, then you're like, okay, well, let's get serious. Let me do something real. Let me attach a database. Let me call another API, and then it's like, you want to quickly be able to dive in to it. So get it out, get the hello world, but then dive deeper under the advanced options.
Yeah, I often say that in a work context, when working for, I always say working for clients, right? Even if you work inside of a company, the person who makes the decisions on that project is your client. If it's the PM, if it's the lead dev, they are your client, right? That's the relationship that I have in my head. And that for some people, that's a bit too clinical or something, or separated, but that's the way I think about it. Whoever it is that you're building the software for, they don't care how you did it. They don't care really how you deployed it. They don't care that you right-click publish to AWS. They don't care that you built a huge pipeline that has 1 million checks and gated check-ins and tests at every single step. They don't care about any of that. They care that they've paid you a bunch of money so that then they can go to a public URL, or perhaps a private one behind a VPN or a VPS or something, or any kind of other situation. They can go to a URL and something happens and it makes them money. That's all they care about. And so I am all for, when it is applicable, right-click, publish, done. Because it's about getting it to that person, getting it into, because until you get the code in the hands of the person who's going to use it, it's not doing anything. It's sitting there being really shiny and lovely inside of your IDE, but it's not making that person any money. So they are going to be less likely to continue paying you money. So if you like receiving money, the goal is get it to them as fast as possible. And like I say, if we joke about you shouldn't, or rather the accepted practice is not to right click and publish, but right click publish exists for a reason, right? And if it solves that problem of getting into the customer's hands, then let's do that, right? You can then build a CI/CD pipeline around it later on when you understand what's going where. But for that initial, here is the extremely early 0.000001 beta version. There you go, right-click publish.
And you're saying exactly what I say when I'm talking about these tools within Visual Studio. It's like you have all these options here. It's great to get that initial feedback. Proof of concept testing and development cycles. It's perfect for that. You don't want to have to spin up and code up your whole CI/CD pipeline just for you to go test something. No, but you want to actually validate that. Oh, okay, this thing is actually going to work on this platform. But once you're going to go production worthy, it's like, okay, that's when I always say, the quickest way to get fired is, right click publish on a production app and not ever, say, oh, well, I'll get to it eventually, because it'll be that time where something critical needs to go and your machine's down. Or maybe you're the manager of the person right clicking and they're like, oh, Joe just left for a better job. How come we can't get this out to production? No one can log into Joe's laptop. That's how we'd publish before. Great. Yeah. Why don't you go join Joe?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a difficult position to be in for sure. Yeah, there's a story. I have a story from my own personal past that revolves around a right-click publish as the only way to deploy. It's not for the show, is what I'll say.
Okay.
But that is, yeah, there were lots of words that I can't say on the podcast that were involved in it. Oh my goodness. Okay, so chaps, where's the best place to go and learn about both yourselves and all of these tools we've discussed today? I mean, I know that so inside of baseball we've got some documentation flying backwards and forwards. I've got loads of links, but for the people who maybe want to catch up with yourselves or maybe want to get an idea of, hey, I totally didn't know that AWS supports .NET. Where do I go to start my journey in that?
Well, if you want to stay up to date on the latest announcements, multiple times a day on Twitter, our .NET handle on Twitter is the best place to go. But our main page is aws.com/.net. You can get there, and it'll get you to basically if it deals with .NET on AWS, it'll be off that. But we'll also, I think you'll publish with the show notes there things like the microservices extractor that we talked about and things like that. And we also have links to SDK and then the tool Norm was talking about there. So they're specific. One thing I will plug in there is a great workshop that we released about a month ago. If you are interested in the AWS microservice extractor for .NET, and I know that is a mouthful. I keep trying to say it. And they won't allow me to create an acronym that I really do want to for it. But there is a workshop. We'll have the link. There's a bit.ly link for it because that also is a long URL. But it's fantastic. That gets you through it. The one tip I will give on that in the porting assisting is the same way. The UI initially, you'll probably, when you use it, you'll say, this seems a little different than what I'm used to. It's because it's modeled after the AWS console. So if you're an AWS customer, you'll be like, oh, this is very intuitive, and that was the whole goal there. But because all of us are .NET, and some of us might not know AWS that are .NET. I just will say, because it requires an account, it doesn't require that you host on AWS what you create from these tools for the extractor and so forth. But go through, create your account. If you play around a little bit, you'll get the feel of our UI. Then once you're in the tool, it'll actually seem natural to you. That would be my tidbit for if you're not used to AWS for those tools.
Cool. Okay. What about keeping up with yourselves then? What's the best place to go for learning those things? Like, let's say I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, Josh and Norm sound awesome. I want to find out everything they're working on because they're great, right? I want to hear about Norm's tools. I want to hear about the talks that Josh is giving, so then I can keep it abreast of what's happening. How do I do that?
I try to stay myself pretty active on Twitter. That's basically my tech outlet. So my handle there is SocketNorm. I don't know why I chose that. I think it was a homework assignment like in college, and I just kept if you find a SocketNorm playing Diablo or whatever other video game, it's probably me because no one else has ever picked that name. It's like once you find a unique name, you just go with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's where I do most of my sort of outlet there, and I do love when people reach out to me there. Talk to me, ask me questions. It's great interacting with people. So that's the fun part about this job is there's a lot of people doing some cool stuff and seeing what they're doing and asking. It's a lot of fun. So,
and I'm on Twitter as well. Hurley in Cloud, my handle. Not as exciting as Socket. Norm.
Excellent. Well, what I want to say, chaps, is thank you very much for spending some time with us this afternoon. I know even like if we take the AWS stuff to one side, I've learned a whole bunch of stuff today as well, just about like the fact that you guys were the first sort of external or one of the first external companies to use NuGet, and one of the first sort of like cloud hosts to support it and stuff like that. So that's all really cool. But then obviously I'm looking forward to showing off the AWS microservice extractor for .NET to some of the people that I know that are still on Framework, and there's nothing wrong with being on Framework, but to show them, hey, look, you can split everything out, and there's this tool that shows you how to do it. And if you want to go down that route, you can, or you could just keep on innovating in Framework. That's totally fine. Because I think that's something that a lot of people don't get, is that like when a new technology, when a new way of doing something comes out, they're always like, but I don't want to do the new thing. Well, you don't have to. You can stay where you are if you want. That's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with that. But you may get some benefits from doing things a different way, right? But yeah, like I say, thank you ever so much, chaps, for spending part of your, I guess, afternoon by this point with me. And
still morning.
It's still the morning.
You got me up way early today.
Time zones are so difficult, right? They genuinely are.
I really appreciate it, Jamie. I love talking to you, and it was very enjoyable. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks. It was a lot of fun.
No worries. Thank you ever so much. That was my interview with Josh Hurley and Norm Johanson. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that, or to reach out via our contact page at .netcore.show/contact. And to come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software.